the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Kornowski. So glad to be with you. We're live across FM and AM on our website, aneighborschoice.com. You can listen live there, aneighborschoice.com, or join us on our podcast, which you can find wherever podcasts are. Just search for David Kornowski there, and on Facebook and YouTube for our video stream. For those who want to join us by the video, you can do so there. You might have to do a little looking, though, because Facebook and YouTube, I think the little algorithms are scared of the content we say because it's just so more interesting, such better topics than the kind of nonsense you hear from their outdated ideas that they push and promote and their bending of the algorithm, trying to act like they're not a publisher, but in fact, they indeed certainly are a publisher for outdated, bad ideas most of the time. And that's what you see, par for the course. In the previous hour, I made the case explaining how to use mythology to understand fake news in our time today. And I'm just going to continue to explain that by using some illustrations of things going on in our time. So, you have this story of Nicholas Sandman. Remember him, this story? Now, apparently he's been invited to speak. He'll speak at the Republican National Convention next week. He was the Covington Catholic High School student, Nick Sandman. And he was the one that was filmed where he was accused of having an inappropriate face. He was accused of bullying and belittling the Native American drummer. And it was a total media frenzy in which this high school kid was used as a kind of symbolic scapegoat to vilify anybody who represents the cultural values of a Catholic high school student like Nick Sandman. And so this is an example of what I'm talking about when we break open and expose how the scapegoat mechanism works in our time today, in which, because he is a Catholic, because he is considered a conservative, he's considered the designated deplorables of the appointed priestly caste in news media who want to shape events in a way that conforms with a narrative that justifies their denomination of state power, namely the politically correct form of liberalism or leftism, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care about the label. I just care about describing the reality. And so, again, remember what I told you, because we live in a Christian-infected society with the aesthetic of the underdog fully baked into the way people process things and try to make meaning and try to even assert power by claiming to be on the side of the martyrs. Because that's the reality we're in 2,000 years after Jesus' infection of telling the good news that fake news mythology was on notice. Those who would try to continue the narrative of fake news mythology have to do so by trying to wrap their project in the name of victims. And so there you have with the Covington student hoax. They have their victim. Who's the victim? The elderly man who's a Native American. We know that Native Americans have been persecuted in history. We know they've been given a terrible deal by government policies in America. But that becomes the occasion by which they create this identity politics hallucination in which this person is now sacred compared to the obvious villain, the person who likes Trump and who is Catholic and conservative. Trump is a villain because he revels in his winning and he revels in his wealth, and you're supposed to pretend that you're poor or that you're on the side of the marginalized in order to have obscene power and wealth in this country. That's why Jeff Bezos' ex-wife donates billions to social justice, leftist causes, and so forth, because that's what you're supposed to do to be able to like make penance for your decadent billion-dollar wealth in this Western society. And so here's what I'm showing you again, how fake news mythology works in real time. Because this man is a Native American, therefore he becomes the automatic, untouchable character in this story that the media is making. And this man, the boy is a Catholic who's got a Trump hat on or something, and he's pro-life, so he's a villain. He's got many villain identity markers. So it's a revenge of the scapegoating. Do you see what I mean? But it's still wrong, because Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't do revenge scapegoating on people. He said it's time to end it completely. And that means if we were to go back in history to the 1800s and see a crowd of people persecuting a Native American, Jesus would stand on the side of that person being persecuted, the Native American. And that would happen in the 1980s, 1990s, anytime. But my point is to show you that Jesus stands on the side of the human person being persecuted by the collective, whoever they are. The media tries to imitate Jesus' stance by saying, oh, look, we're on the side of the victim. See, this person, because they have an external identity that makes them a victim, which I think is a patronizing thing to do and really ugly to treat people like categories like that, like the media likes to do. But they say, because he's that, therefore, this person's the automatic villain. Therefore, let's try to ruin this kid's life. Let's lie, let's slander, let's make up stuff. Let's get the whole country harassing this poor kid because they're in a panic hysteria. They are fully haunted by the cross and they don't know how to handle it. They're losing their minds. They're losing their minds, and that's why they're freaking out at a kid because he's looking at a Native American. Didn't even do anything. And so now he's going to speak at the Republican National Convention. And look, I am not saying by any means that the Republican National Convention is on the side, is getting the side of the victims right as Jesus would. Not at all. Mitch McConnell's party, these people's party, that is a side that's fully entrenched in the false establishment binary game that keeps the status quo going of debt and accusation and blame games and in perpetual wars and perpetual encroachment of our liberties at home. But there are examples in which good things happen in the midst of a bad institution, like the Republican establishment, because allowing Nick Sandmann to speak is a kind of challenge to that failed myth-making attempt that tried to take place against Nick Sandmann. It's the vindication of his innocence. That's a good thing. To allow the victims to speak. That's what the Bible does in the ancient times. Joseph's perspective is allowed to be spoken. Even Job, the story of Job is the story of a person persecuted by his so-called friends. They're not friends. They're trying to get him to just say guilty. Just say you deserve your punishment, Job, and then we'll go ahead and unleash the mob. That's why they use language like the armies of heaven are approaching. This is just, the wolves are going to get you. They're using all these pack animals analogies and their descriptions of what he needs to admit guilt for. In reality, what they're trying to cover up is a mob attack against Job. And again, the Bible, in its amazing progressive challenge to the old superstitious brutality of the old order, says, no, we're going to give Job's perspective. You're going to see that he's innocent and that he refuses to bow to the mob, just like Nicholas Sandmann apparently did in this story. You see how when you understand the context of anthropology, when you understand mythology, the whole formula of the fake news thing is so predictable. It's not like this random thing. Where'd political correctness come from? No, we know where it came from. It came from a cheap imitation of Christianity because folks are haunted by the impact of Christianity on their conscience. They're haunted by the idea that God stands on the side of a wrongfully persecuted man left to die alone, rejected by his friends and everybody alike. God stands on the side of scapegoats. He stands on the side of our victims. And we will continue to victimize people and justify it to our own peril because the system doesn't work. And when we try to go back to that old scapegoating way, it will fall apart and spectacular ways right in front of our very eyes. So it's up to us to learn this lesson the easy way, which I'm trying to show us, or we're going to learn it the hard way by continually justifying, locking people up for years, locking people up for days even for victimless behaviors, by not understanding how restorative justice works, by not understanding how important it is to protect the human person against the collective, how that's something that's very deeply tied to what Jesus did. And it's deeply tied into how we're supposed to imitate the treatment of our neighbor today. You can't make justifications for treating people in dehumanizing, scapegoating ways, by trying to turn them into villains, by trying to treat them the way you would not want to be treated. It's just not the way. We have to go to something better. A Neighbor's Choice will continue in just a moment.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Our monetary system is failing. Negative interest rates, growing debt, highly speculative market, and the dollar is being devalued by the Fed. Investing your wealth has never been more challenging. Who wants to earn just 1% interest annually in a savings account, or 0.5% with a 10-year U.S. Treasury bond, or invest in the S&P at its height and in the middle of a pandemic? Thankfully, there is another option: monetary metals. They pay interest on gold in gold with no storage costs ever. That's 2 to 4.5% annual interest on gold and silver, paid out not in dollars, but in ounces, and with zero vault fees. Upgrade to monetary metals today. Visit interestongold.com/David. That's interestongold.com/David.
I'm attorney Young Kim. The financial problems caused by the coronavirus nightmare are not going away anytime soon. If you are behind on your credit card or mortgage payments, or bill collectors are harassing you, there are ways to get them off your back and legally wipe the slate clean. Call Consumer Law Attorneys at 888-99-FRESH for a free consultation. Learn how we can stop the bank and collection companies and help people in debt get a fresh start. Call 888-99-FRESH, 37374. Main office, St. Petersburg.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Breaking apart fake news like no one else in media, A Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm David Gronowski, your host, and we're soaring high across the Sunshine State and around the world on our podcast and our website, aneighborschoice.com. So I'm showing you how to use the toolkit that I've been introducing to our community for some time, and how to use that mythology, that anthropology, all guided by Christian understanding, by the gospel technology. The story of Jesus as a kind of technology that allows us to see clearly the errors of our society and correct them in a nonviolent, peaceful way where everybody can win. But I'm also showing you how forces in power, guided by groupthink, which is a kind of religious phenomenon, are going to use the attitudes and feelings of Christianity towards the underdog, towards the misfit, towards the victim, the marginalized, as a kind of imitation against it, to justify using the old violence of the old order. Do you see what I mean? So the old order, they just sacrificed in the name of winners, and they didn't have to apologize for it. Then Christianity comes, Jesus comes into history. He says, no, the underdog is now going to be represented in history, and I'm going to stand on their side, and I'm going to fight for them, and it's going to create this impact in history which is going to shake the foundations of the powerful and wicked in high places. And you and I are in that moment in history in which that infection is getting deeper and deeper, what Jesus did. And so the more we kind of try to do the old way of might makes right, of beating down and scapegoating people we don't like, and using violence collectively against people and destroying their personhood, the more we try to keep that going, the more chaos it breaks down. And the old way, when they would sacrifice people, it kind of created order. But today when we do it, because Jesus kind of reveals how it works, it's like a magic trick that doesn't work anymore. It doesn't create the kind of effect of uniting us that it used to. So every time we see the scapegoat mechanism happening in our time, we have division. So I was explaining Nicholas Sandman and how he was a scapegoat, but did you notice how half the country automatically treated him like he was an innocent scapegoat, and the other country, or the other side of the country, or whatever, the other half of the country wanted to continually hallucinate that he was a villain? You see, in the old world, if they designated a scapegoat in a village, everybody was united that, yeah, that guy's the bad guy. But today, because Jesus has broken the system, depending on which story it is and who's being persecuted, we don't agree on who the scapegoats are. We don't agree who's the monster, who's the villain, who's the innocent one, who's the marginalized. We can't agree, and therefore it breaks us apart the more we keep trying to do it. But try we do. We continually try to scapegoat, but do so in the image of Christianity. So Christianity ends the scapegoating violence of tyranny in the past with Jesus, but he doesn't end it overnight. He infects it. He destroys it non-violently through history. And that's why we're not in utopia right now, because it's up to humans to get this, and we're slow to move and change and improve and let go of our bad, tyrannical past. But that tyranny always tries to imitate Jesus' concern for the underdog in order to justify its scapegoating and its tyranny today. So you can see this in every headline. I'm showing you right now how it works. Look at this story about Goodyear, the tire company, right? That's the big scandal of today. Another culture war issue. It says Goodyear responds to call for boycott over reports of zero tolerance policy. This is on Twitter. The tire manufacturer released a statement on Wednesday challenging a photo leaked to the press, alleging to reveal a new company policy permitting Black Lives Matter materials in the workplace while prohibiting politically affiliated forms of expression. You see even the narrative there is just so biased. It's myth making. So Black Lives Matter materials are not politically affiliated forms of expression, but see how they lie? It's so stupid. You can just see it. Quote, the visual in question was not created or distributed by Goodyear Corporate, the company added. President Trump responded to initial reports on Wednesday by calling for a boycott of the Goodyear products. So there's this screenshot, and I don't know all the details of this story, but you click on this screenshot of this training or whatever it is with Goodyear. And I don't know, again, the whole details. So I'm just reporting on the cursory glance at this story. But it says acceptable attire is Black Lives Matter, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, pride materials. Unacceptable is Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Make America Great Again attire, political affiliated slogans or materials. So I want to explain to you again what's going on in this story from the perspective of the gospel technology, of being able to see clearly how our history is being shaped and the myth-making is falling apart. Because it's all about taking on the garb of victims in order to justify power plays. I've explained to you before that I have no problem with the slogan Black Lives Matter in and of itself, but the organization that raises millions of dollars, blacklivesmatter.com, says they're against the nuclear Western family. That means a husband and a wife in a committed marriage with kids. They want to destroy that. So you have 5 men and 4 women in the house with 16 kids, or 3 men, 2 women, or 2, they would say that's even discriminatory, that I'm assuming it's men and women. It's got to be 70 genders all represented in the house for them to be happy. They want to destroy everything about the foundation of lifelong, self-sacrificial, monogamous marriage with children. That's what this says on their website. Go look at their belief statement, blacklivesmatter.com. They want to dismantle, quote, dismantle the Western prescribed nuclear family, whichever way you want to say it, whether you want to be a Yale approved nuclear or if you, whichever way, it doesn't matter. But anyways, but you see, what's unacceptable is Blue Lives Matter. Now, so what does that say? Now, again, I'm not going to fight over which slogan you want to wear or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm trying to show you kind of like a scientific approach to understanding this whole cultural melee that we're in. The reason why Blue Lives Matter are unacceptable is because that slogan is politically incorrect because it represents a position of power, right? It's like saying, when Jesus is being persecuted, well, Roman soldiers' lives matter, right? They're just following their orders, right? And so, therefore, because we're so Christian haunted in the cross, we see these headlines, these slogans differently. And that's why big, giant corporations will give support for victim identity group slogans, but they will say unacceptable to slogans that are ostensibly connected to those who have the power of law. So I'm trying to show you how this works in real time in the events today. I'm trying to show you that we've come a long way in history, and there's good and bad depending on how we act. In the ancient world, the idea of banishing a hat that says we honor the soldiers or the police of the Roman Empire in Jesus' day, are you kidding me? They would not accept that. The Roman legion was sacred. And the idea that you could work at a Roman business and say, hey, you're not allowed to wear a hat in support of that.
Ronald Reagan would turn over in his grave if he saw what's going on today.
Crazy things are happening.
You cannot be afraid. You've got to stand up for what you believe is right.
But one thing is for sure.
You can't trust anybody.
For talk, news, and information, you can count on us.
Enough is enough. I almost blew a gasket.
Good for the country.
I know what I'm talking about. A lot of wackos out there.
Your connection to talk about it. The all-new News Talk 1040, WHP.
Joe Biden speaking today by video to the Hispanic caucus a day before he officially accepts the Democratic nomination for president.
What we're going to see again tonight and tomorrow is the Democratic Party is coming together to unite our country.
Among the speakers tonight, President Obama and Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris. President Trump is about to hold a briefing at the White House. Florida's largest teachers union is suing Governor Ron DeSantis. It's hoping to move education online to start the year due to the threat of COVID-19. Thousands in the San Francisco Bay Area have been ordered to evacuate as wildfires continue to burn. Among them, this woman who lives in Vacaville.
I got the important papers, and we had our clothes and stuff all, we have an emergency pack ready.
A blistering heat wave in California is entering its second week. Stocks lost some ground in the last hour of trading today. The S&P 500 gave up 15 points a day after a record close. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
A Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm David Gronowski, your host. Glad to have our radio listeners with us, our podcast and live stream. And, want to turn to the economy now with our partner, Keith Weiner, who we have helping us understand the markets today. He is the founder of Monetary Metals. And Keith, you're a big advocate of gold and a big advocate of understanding the market with an emphasis on what interest rates mean. So I wanted to kind of just get you on today and, again, follow up where we left off last week. What are some of the indicators you're seeing in the market that you think folks should be paying attention to as they navigate these unique times?
Hey, David, it's good to be back on. I think there's two dramatic changes from where we started the year, before the virus. And that is, number one, the interest rate. Like if you invested in a 10-year Treasury bond in January, you could get 1.8%, I think that's what it was. And then in March, that completely collapsed. I shouldn't say completely, all but completely collapsed. And you get 0.5% now, 0.6%, something like that. And so if there's a return, if you should be getting a return for every risk you take, the return has just come down dramatically, almost 75%, cut in what you can get in return. But at the same time, the risk has gone up dramatically. And I refer to the fiscal condition of the U.S. government. So before COVID, the 12 months that ended March 31, the U.S. government increased its net debt by $1.7 trillion. They quote a lower number for the deficit, which in theory should equal that. I don't know by what accounting trick they used to get a lower number, but the actual debt increased. There's a Treasury website called Debt to the Penny that you can enter any pair of dates and you can see how much the debt increased across that period of time, 1.7 trillion. Then they passed the CARES Act, and then there was a $500 billion supplement to the CARES Act. So between those two, they added $2.8 trillion in spending to a budget that was already 1.7 trillion in the hole. So 1.7 plus 2.8 equals $4.5 trillion is what the deficit is. But given the lockdown, a lot of people are making a lot less money or no money at all. And so there's going to probably be $1 trillion shortfall in tax revenues compared to the previous year. And if you add that in, you're looking at $5.5 trillion shortfall. That is, the government has to borrow $5.5 trillion just to keep even. That's assuming that they don't pass another crazy stimulus, bailout, welfare, whatever you want to call it, program, which seems certain that they will because both parties agree that they want to do that, and they're really only quibbling over the details and grandstanding and sandbagging and all that. But you're still looking at $5.5+ trillion in shortfall. Do you want to be a lender? Do you want to be a creditor to this? I dare say drunken sailor, except it makes drunken sailors look bad if I make that analogy. Do you want to be a lender to that? The risk has gone up dramatically and the return has gone down dramatically. And so people turn to gold as a way of opting out. And that doesn't necessarily say good things about gold per se. It says something really rotten about how things are going in Washington, D.C. That makes sense?
Yeah. And so, what about folks who, they say, well, gold, that seems like a rich man's game. I'm just, middle class guy or woman, and I don't have, that's kind of intimidating to think about gold. Is there other things? What about platinum, palladium, silver, all these other, metals out there? Is there something there that could help, be a hedge against a dollar that's getting massively in debt here?
So I would break all the metals down into two groups. The monetary metals, which happens to be the name of my company, but now I'm speaking in generic, and then the expensive industrial ingredients. And so what sets them out, and the monetary metals are gold and silver, period. What sets them apart is people accumulate them without any particular limit and have been doing so for at least 5,000 years. A friend of mine wrote a book called The Dawn of Gold, in which he argues the Neanderthals were starting to pull gold nuggets out of the stream beds 13,000 years ago in Europe. And he's got some anthropological evidence as to why he believes that. So for thousands of years, people go on accumulating this stuff, which is extraordinary because it means there's no such thing as a glut in gold or silver. There's no such thing as, well, there's too much stockpiles. And if you look at any other commodity, what's the first report that everybody who trades crude oil, for example, is looking at? They want to see the petroleum reserves and the drawdowns. They want to see how much is there, and if there's a glut, then the price collapses until the glut is worked off. Mm-hmm. And in the monetary metals, that's what makes them money, is that people are happy to hold money without any particular limit, whereas everything else, there's a glut, the price crashes. And so I put platinum and palladium, and then, of course, there's all kinds of fun metals like rhodium that, they're fun. I mean, you can make a lot of money speculating in them. But if you want to talk about what is intimidating or should be intimidating to the average middle-class investor, speculating in a thinly traded volatile market like rhodium, that should not be comfortable. That should be terrifying. Because anything that can go from hundreds of dollars to over $10,000 can also go from over $10,000 to hundreds of dollars, and it can do so in a hurry.
What about, in school we learned about the famous Cross of Gold speech by William Jennings Bryan, who was the representative from Nebraska. And he talked about how, we needed silver to bring us, prosperity, that gold was the rich man's money. That's always been kind of a thing in the history of America. And maybe you didn't expect to challenge William Jennings Bryan today, but I just want to get your take on that. What's the angle there that he's coming from, and how does that, relate to, what you're saying, about gold and silver?
He was, my position, William Jennings Bryan, he was the instrumental guy working for President Woodrow Wilson, who made the Federal Reserve Act happen. So he, but going back to a little bit prior in history, when the Civil War occurred, then they suspended specie money and wanted people to use just paper. And after the war, at that time, everybody was in agreement that okay, we have to go back to gold and silver, but there were a lot of dishonest politics occurring even then, and so something happened that was called the Crime of 73, and that was 1873. And that is when they passed the new Mintage Act authorizing the mint. So the way it worked at that time was you brought metal to the mint, and then they coined it into money for you at no charge. There was no seigniorage in the U.S., which was kind of a cool feature. So the Mintage Act, reopens the mint, but they left out the $1 silver coin. And effectively demonetize silver. And so what happened was, and of course, at that time, people had gold and silver, as money. The people who had gold were wealthier, and that gold tended to be in the bank. So gold funded the banking system. The people who had silver tended to be the farmers and artisans and craftsmen, and they tended to have silver at home. And so by demonetizing silver, they unshackled the ratio of gold to silver, which historically had always been around 15 or 16 to 1. And then that gold-silver ratio really began to rise. And what that meant was the people who had silver at home were impoverished because the value of the thing that they had as money was falling. At the same time, because the government mucked with the definition of money, debts were denominated in dollars, not ounces of gold or ounces of silver. So you owe, if you're a farmer and you borrowed money to clear a field or something like that, you owe a certain amount of dollars, and now the government's saying that dollars mean gold only, and the silver that you thought you had as a monetary reserve is falling in value. The government basically just screwed you, as what happened. And so there was a lot of anger after 1873 amongst the people. William Jennings Bryan, 1896, trying to capitalize on that anger. What he wanted was an inflationary system. Because he thought inflation would be good. It's the old John Law fallacy. So William McKinley defeats him in 1896. William Jennings Bryan doesn't go away. He becomes a cog in the progressive machine, and he gets his chance to have his revenge 17 years after that, in 1913, working for Wilson. He was the guy who put together the Federal Reserve Act and sold it to enough senators to get it to pass.
So he was like kind of like
a mixed thing.
So he was kind of like Bernie Sanders, where he makes a big game about being a populist, but he ends up endorsing Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, the establishment, at the end.
That's right. And there's a kernel of truth in what he's saying,
right,
because what the government did to the small saver in 1873 was horribly unjust. To capitalize this unrighteous anger against real injustice in order to do what? In order to sell everybody down the river to, the then equivalent of, I'm not sure that Wilson would be a Biden, trying to think of what the analogy for him might be. Maybe a bit more of a Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez,
wow,
like more explicitly socialist,
uh-huh,
but corrupt and crony, added into the mix.
Wow.
That's William Jennings Bryan.
One of the good things about this woke history stuff is that Woodrow Wilson's legacy is getting a little bit more scrutinized in recent times. So hopefully that will continue for the right reasons, that we can know his account of what he did, more accurately. I want to go ahead.
I was going to just read that, was it Princeton has a building or a school named after Woodrow Wilson, and they just said that because Wilson was also quite a racist,
mm-hmm,
that they're now canceling him and they're renaming the building or the school or the department or whatever it was that had his name. And I said, okay, well, that's good.
Yeah. And hopefully they'll realize the other things he did too, that was instrumental in a lot of the problems that we have today. But turning closer to history, William Jennings Bryan was from Nebraska, but we have a modern titan of investment today, Warren Buffett, who also hails from Nebraska, I believe, whose father was his father was a big advocate of gold, wasn't he, Howard Buffett?
Yes, he was. Howard Buffett was.
So is Warren Buffett a big fan of gold too? He's a very successful investor.
He has quite famously, and I think a little disingenuously, taken his pot shots at gold over the years, correctly but disingenuously at the same time. So he says, gold is just a lump of metal, being neither procreative nor useful. If you own that lump of metal, then 20 years later, you still own the same lump of metal, which is true. And of course, he was, shilling or hacking for the Fed and for the dollar. But he just recently came out in the news, Berkshire Hathaway sold its portfolio of bank stocks ranging from Goldman Sachs to Visa and MasterCard, and traded it for shares of one of the big gold mining companies, Barrick.
Huh.
And which is very interesting. This is effectively a short on the economy. He's saying that in gold terms, in other words, in money terms, the banking system is going down. And so there goes that. I think he also called gold a pet rock.
Did he do that during the 2008 housing crisis and that whole thing?
I am not aware of Warren Buffett taking any precious metals position, except in the late 1990s, he made a bet on silver. He thought he knew, and this is the thing with the monetary metals. everybody, every once in a while, somebody thinks they can calculate how much, silver or gold is out there in the world, and they think they can corner it. Mm-hmm. And the reality is there's a heck of a lot more of the stuff out there that anybody knows about. Well, let's face it, people have been hiding this stuff from their nosy neighbors and from their governments for thousands of years. You cannot do an inventory and say, well, we've added up all the gold or all the silver. So that's what Buffett thought he did in the late 90s. He made a big bet in silver. I think he bought $1 billion and a half worth of silver in the late 90s. Did not work out for him. He sold it and then was kind of apologetic to his shareholders, as I recall. I'm not aware he did anything in 2008. I think he doubled down on the banking system after 2008. And so it's interesting for a lot of reasons that now suddenly he sold out of the banking stocks.
So maybe that's an indication that when establishment-friendly folks like him are betting against the dollar, that maybe this is the big one that a lot of folks are hoping are worried about, right?
It could be, or at the very least that the banking system may lose a great deal of value. So if the government, comes in and has to bail out the banks, or there's some sort of, debt for equity swap or something, the shareholders of the banks would be creamed, even if the monetary system doesn't fail, and even if the U.S. dollar, is doing fine, the owners of the banks may not. And so, it's a little hard to read into exactly what it is that he is foreseeing. But of course, he has a great deal of knowledge of what's going on internally that, isn't necessarily published. So that's what always makes it fun and interesting to follow a guy like that.
Well, very good. Keith Weiner, I always appreciate your commentary on the economy, and your website is monetary-metals.com. We look forward to learning more from your perspective on the market and on things like interest. And I like getting into the history too. I think it's really interesting when we can learn from history to see the patterns of these discussions around money and gold and so forth. So appreciate you coming on.
All right, thank you.
When we continue, we'll be back with more news on A Neighbor's Choice. Don't go anywhere. David Gronowski here. You probably know that it's good to own some gold. Well, I want to tell you about Monetary Metals, a company started by my frequent guest, Keith Weiner. The conventional way to own gold is to buy coins at high cost and hide them at home, or pay annual fees to store them in a vault where they just sit there. Monetary Metals is different. With Monetary Metals, you buy gold just above spot and then put it to work so that you're earning interest, paid out not in dollars, but in more ounces of gold. To top it off, there are 0 vault fees. So stop having your metal just sit there. Upgrade to Monetary Metals today and start earning interest on it. Upgrade at interestongold.com/David. That's interestongold.com/David.
Not ready to go to your favorite seafood restaurant? Get the highest quality fish for less, delivered straight to your door by Fast Fresh Seafood. Order our fresh hot snapper, grouper, mahi, and more. They're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day, and individually vacuum wrapped. Pick the size filet you want, the amount you want, and checkout's easy at fastfreshseafood.com. The best thing, every fish is on sale. Fastfreshseafood.com. Caught fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Hello, David Gornosky here. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. So, tonight, in the land of politics, you'll be hearing from the DNC disaster Zoom video conference. Who do they have? They've got Hillary Clinton, who's going to probably go on and on and on about how angry she is that the throne that she was entitled to because of her position in Hollywood royalty and all that, because of her gender, she had the right to butcher the men and women of Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, anywhere she wants. And she's angry that we did not just bow to her and give her the throne so she could help out her friends in high places and give a few scraps to the rest of us so that we would be happy and thankful that we were a part of justice. Okay, so she's going to do her little song and dance about trying to stoke xenophobia and trying to stoke people to be against peace with North Korea and Russia and Syria and so forth. And the media is going to do everything they can to try to build up that paper tiger of victim-wrapped ugliness and collective violence. And then you're going to have Kamala Harris, another person who we've talked about on this program who locked up more people than almost anybody you can possibly imagine when she had the chance, laughing about it all the way. So you see how both of those individuals are, again, an example of that kind of Christ-haunted society of elites trying to continue the scapegoat violence, but do so in the name of victim identities so as to look and feel more like the real thing, which is Christianity, which we always reject. Even those of us who say we're Christian oftentimes reject the real thing when it comes to practice, not just words. And so, you know, they both use, look at this, you got Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton, both of them using their female gender, right, as a kind of shield from criticism for their record of locking up millions of females. Think about that. Think of how fake and flimsy the whole mythology around this victimism really is. By victimism, I mean trying to have power and control and use collective violence, but do so in the name of victims as a way of excusing the bad, ugly behavior. That's why Trump is such a heretic for the politically correct religion, because he holds that power and he says he's in it because he likes himself. You're not supposed to say that. You could do that. You think Obama and Hillary Clinton are not narcissistic just as much, if not more so, than Trump? Of course they are. But the difference is that they preen the whole language of sacred concern for victims. They use language like, we're here to be together, and they have the intonation right and the tone right. And Trump just kind of fumbles and bumbles all over that whole decorum. And so because he sits in that symbolic power position and he doesn't play the script like they do, he is the supreme heretic for the politically correct folks in the one-party machine in D.C. Even if he does a lot of the same things they do, like rack up debt and keep, he's still in NATO. Why didn't he pull out? I think he should have pulled out. But, there's only so much, I guess, they allow presidents to do, actually, isn't it? But you see, in the way, the name of the game for political correctness is you can have power, you can lock up poor folks like Cherie Peoples, or let's just say marginalized folks, both poor, middle class, or whatever. Cherie Peoples is one of them that I've gotten to see because she was a visible example of the callousness that Kamala Harris had as Attorney General in California, where she locked up this woman of color because her daughter missed too many days of school because she had a grave illness. And Kamala made sure she had such a bully. Think about the bully. Her staff made sure they had a bunch of news media parked out there ready to record Cherie Peoples being escorted in shame and humiliation as a scapegoat, just like they would do in the old times when they would parade a victim before scapegoating them, to shame them like bullies do. But it's okay, according to the politically correct elites, because, well, Kamala Harris is using her gender, her identity, politics as a shield from seeing clearly the ugliness of their bad policies that they've done to harm our economy, to harm our families, to harm our togetherness, to break families apart with mass incarceration for nonviolent, victimless crimes, to loot the economy with rigged trade deals that are not free or not market-based trade deals, to bail out the rich and powerful, to cover up for folks like Bill Clinton and their awful record, to cover up for the awful wars in the Obama administration, before and after, because Trump has not done enough to end them. Even though he said he did, he said he's going to do it, he needs to do it. But that's what the name of the game is. That's the playbook that you'll continually see. Ugly scapegoating, barbaric, brutish behavior in the form of bad wars, bad taxes, bad regulations, bad corporate welfare, bad enemy identity politics. But it's all done in the name of, well, she's a female, or, well, she's a person of color, so therefore she can do whatever she wants to people of color around the world. I just have had enough of that nonsense. Have you? I want to breathe the fresh air of freedom. That's our birthright, to do that. I want everyone to have their freedom. I want people to embrace the dignity of personhood for every neighbor, no matter where they come from. Their gender, their race, whatever, none of that should be preventing us from honoring and dignifying our neighbors and allowing them to have their freedom and allowing them to pursue their businesses and their talents and their religious expression and their self-defense rights and their property and their creativity and their innovation and even their mistakes and sins. We got to allow people to have that freedom to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling. Because the old way is not going to work. Even if I wanted it to, it's just not working because Jesus destroyed the scapegoat mechanism in history. And try as the fake news mythology makers of our day, it will never, ever return. That's good news, my friend. That's good news. I'm David Gronowski. Email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.